All right, welcome back, everyone.
Glad to be here.
Today we're diving into ambulance operations,
Oh, cool.
then and now.
Nice.
And honestly, you might be surprised by how much has changed over time.
I bet.
We've got some excerpts from a modern EMT textbook and some case studies to guide us.
Okay.
And by the end of this deep dive, you should have a solid understanding of ambulance design,
Nice.
the equipment,
Yeah.
and we'll even touch on air medical services,
Yo,
which is cool.
it is.
So
Yeah.
we're not just going to be focusing on the what,
Right.
but also the why behind a lot of these things.
I like that.
So
Yeah.
the reasoning for the designs, how the protocols have evolved,
Hmm.
the strategic decisions that go into emergency medical services, all that.
Cool.
So let's actually start by rolling back the clock, way back.
Okay.
Now, I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but most people don't think of Napoleon
Right.
as an innovator in the medical field
Like at all.
at all. But turns out he implemented a surprisingly advanced ambulance system for his army
Really?
in the 1700s.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I know. It's a fascinating little tidbit.
Mm-hmm.
So what's really interesting here is that he recognized the strategic advantage
Okay.
of quickly evacuating and treating wounded soldiers.
Okay.
And this wasn't just about compassion. This
Nice.
was about keeping his troops battle ready,
Gotcha.
morale, all of that.
Makes sense.
So he even instituted training for his soldiers to be able to provide basic first aid
Mm-hmm.
and transport the injured using specially designed horse-drawn carts.
Wow. That's pretty advanced for the time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's wild. It's such a far cry from what we envision
Right.
as an ambulance today.
Totally.
Makes you wonder what those early ambulances were equipped with.
Right.
Right.
What did they have back then?
Yeah, well, if we're comparing to, say, early America, you're basically looking at brandy, splints,
Okay.
and a whole lot of hope.
So basically nothing.
Yeah, not a whole lot.
Wow.
But fast forward to today, and we've got these high-tech
Right.
mobile ERs,
Yeah.
and they're equipped with everything.
Crazy.
You've got defibrillators, telemedicine, even automated CPR machines.
Really?
I know.
That's incredible. So
Okay.
it makes you think, though, all that advanced technology probably comes with its own set of challenges.
Oh, absolutely. So, for instance, you've got technology like mobile data terminals
Yeah.
and these communication systems,
Right.
which can be invaluable.
Yeah.
But they also introduce the risk of distracted driving,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
which is a major concern in those emergency situations.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So you've got all these different tasks.
Right.
Navigating traffic, split-second decisions.
Yeah.
Must be really demanding.
Incredibly demanding. So let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and dive into the design of these modern-day, life-saving vehicles. So the textbook mentions that the NFPA, so that's the National Fire Protection Association, they set the standard
Gotcha.
for ambulance design.
Mm-hmm.
And the top priorities are safety and efficiency.
Okay.
So within that standard, there are actually three main types of ambulances
Interesting.
that are classified by their chassis and their configuration.
Okay.
But what unites them all is the essential equipment that they carry.
I see.
So you're looking at oxygen tanks, airway management tools, IV supplies, medications, everything.
Got it. I was actually reading about the powerful suction units
Oh, yeah.
that they have.
What'd you think about that?
With the 300 millimeter HG vacuum, that's intense.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So basically, think of it this way. That's about the same suction power
Okay.
as some heavy-duty shop vacs.
Oh, wow.
But in medical terms,
Yeah.
that means you can quickly and effectively clear any airway obstruction,
Right.
which could be life or death
Yeah.
in emergencies like choking or severe trauma.
Yeah.
So the textbook also highlighted how the equipment is strategically grouped inside the ambulance.
Oh, okay.
So airway tools are near the head of the stretcher,
Okay.
cardiac care items at the side.
Right.
So it's all about efficiency in these situations.
Yeah, like every second counts. So having things organized
Right.
within reach, that's essential.
It is.
And you know what else we can't forget about?
What's that?
The jump kit.
The jump kit, right?
It's like this mini ER packed into a portable kit,
Yeah.
and it's for those first 5 minutes on the scene.
Yeah. It's like playing Tetris, but with life-saving equipment.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So what's in there?
Yeah.
You've got your basic airway management tools,
Mhm.
bandages, medications, blood pressure cuff. It's incredible.
Wow. They fit so much into that little kit.
They do. And, an ambulance call is so much more than grabbing the equipment
Yeah.
and rushing to the scene.
Right.
The textbook outlines 9 distinct phases, like a whole journey.
Okay, so it starts with preparation, where the EMTs are meticulously checking their equipment,
Yeah.
making sure everything's in its designated spot.
Yeah, like a pre-flight checklist.
Exactly, like a pilot.
Exactly.
And then there's the dispatch phase,
Right.
where they receive the call,
Right.
gather all that information, the location, the nature of the emergency, potential hazards, how many patients, all that stuff. And what's really fascinating here is the role of emergency medical dispatch.
Mhm.
It's evolved a lot over the years.
It has.
Dispatchers are trained now to actually provide pre-arrival instructions.
Wally.
Yeah, so like guiding callers through basic life-saving measures,
Mm-hmm.
CPR, controlling bleeding,
Wow.
even before the ambulance arrives.
It's like having a virtual EMT right there on the phone with you.
Yeah.
That's incredible. All right, so then
Right, and then of course,
you arrive at the scene.
you arrive at the scene, but you know what most people don't realize?
What's that?
The scene size up
Uh-huh.
actually starts from inside the ambulance,
Oh.
not outside.
Why is that?
So they're trained to look for any potential hazards, evaluate the situation,
Okay.
make sure it's safe before they step out.
So they're considering everything.
Yeah, traffic patterns, downed power lines, hazmat,
Right.
even hostile individuals.
You don't think about all that.
No.
When you see the ambulance pull up,
No,
it's like, wow, safety's paramount.
it is.
Every step of the way.
Right. It's not just about rushing in.
Not at all.
So then, once they determine it's safe,
Mm-hmm.
you've got the transfer of the patient
Okay.
to the ambulance
Right.
transport delivery to the hospital.
Right.
But it's not just a ride. They're
Yeah.
constantly assessing,
Yeah.
providing interventions, communicating with the receiving facility.
So important.
And, you know, we can't forget that human touch, comfort, reassurance,
It's huge.
it's a scary situation.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that EMTs are so much more than just ambulance drivers.
They are.
You know, they're these skilled professionals
Yeah.
providing compassionate care
Absolutely.
and support throughout that whole process. But let's switch gears again.
Okay.
Let's talk about what it's like to be behind the wheel of an ambulance.
All right.
Because those defensive driving techniques
Yeah.
must be a whole other level of skill.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting?
What's that?
Speed doesn't actually save lives, good care does.
Right.
So EMTs are trained to drive with due regard,
Mm-hmm.
which means they have exemptions from certain traffic laws when responding to emergencies.
Okay.
But safety is still the #1 priority.
Gotcha. So how do they balance that then?
Yeah, balancing the need for urgency
Right.
with the risks of aggressive driving.
Right.
It's a delicate balance,
Right.
and it requires constant assessment and decision-making.
Wow.
They have to consider traffic conditions, the road layout, visibility, time of day to determine the safest and most efficient route.
Wow. That is,
A lot to juggle,
yeah, especially under pressure.
especially under pressure. And they have to maintain that cushion of safety.
Around the ambulance, be aware of tailgaters, always checking blind spots, which
Yeah, those are way bigger
way bigger.
in an ambulance than a regular car.
Way bigger. And then there's that siren syndrome,
Oh, yeah.
which is kind of ominous.
It does sound kind of ominous.
It can be. So both EMTs and other drivers can experience these physiological and psychological effects
Oh, okay.
from the siren. So adrenaline rushes, anxiety,
Oh, wow.
and it can even affect decision-making.
So the siren itself becomes a factor,
factor.
in all this?
Yeah.
Wow. So they've got to be aware of their own responses as
yeah.
well as anticipating how others are going to react.
Absolutely, because not everybody reacts
Right.
calmly and predictably when they hear a siren coming.
No,
So some people panic, some freeze, some try to speed up.
it's unpredictable.
It's unpredictable, and that's why defensive driving is so crucial.
Okay. Well, speaking of unpredictable situations,
Yeah.
let's shift gears one more time.
Okay.
Let's talk about air medical operations. So those helicopters. Right.
That come in for those really urgent cases.
Yeah. When are those typically called in?
Well, usually it's for those really time-sensitive injuries,
Okay.
like major trauma, heart attacks,
Mhm.
situations where ground transport would just take too long,
Right.
remote locations
Yeah.
where the ground access is just impossible,
Right.
or if the scene is too overwhelming for the ground crew.
Like a mass casualty.
Yeah, exactly. Natural disasters, any of that.
Wow.
So how does this process work?
Yeah.
Do they just like magically appear?
Not quite. It's carefully coordinated.
Okay.
Starts with the ground crew
Right.
recognizing the need for that air medical support.
Okay.
Communicate that to dispatch.
Okay. Then what?
Dispatch then contacts the flight team,
Right.
and they evaluate the situation, gather information about the patient,
Okay.
determine if the medevac flight is even feasible,
Gotcha.
appropriate.
So what are some of the factors that go into that?
Well, weather's a major one. Helicopters can't operate in, like, thunderstorms or blizzards.
Makes sense.
So they also got to consider the environment, terrain.
Right.
If it's too mountainous,
Yeah.
too many obstacles,
Yeah.
finding a safe landing zone might be impossible.
Right, because they need a pretty sizable area
They do.
to land safely.
At least 100 by 100 feet.
Wow. That's bigger than a basketball court.
It is.
And you've got to make sure there are no overhead obstacles.
Power lines, trees, all of that.
So much goes into this.
It does.
Yeah. And I imagine nighttime landings
Yeah,
add a whole other level of complexity.
absolutely. So visibility is limited at night.
Of course.
So the ground crew has to use lights to mark the landing zone,
Right.
and everybody has to be extra cautious.
I bet.
And no shining bright lights
Right.
directly at the helicopter,
Gotcha.
because that can temporarily blind the pilot.
Yeah. So this very carefully choreographed dance,
It is.
everyone working together to ensure that transfer is safe.
Yep. A lot more to it.
It
Yeah.
meets the eye.
It seems like it. Well, we've only just scratched the surface here.
We have.
There are even more special considerations when it comes to landing on uneven terrain or responding to hazmat incidents,
Right.
which we'll dive into those in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But for now, we'll leave it there.
Right.
So we left off talking about these air medical operations
They did.
and how complex those calls can be.
Yeah.
So before we get into like specifics on certain situations, like the uneven terrain, the hazmat incidents,
Mm-hmm.
are there other factors
Oh, for sure.
that go into that decision to call for air medical transport?
Yeah, absolutely. So altitude's another big one.
Okay.
As the elevation increases, the air thins out,
Right.
makes it harder to breathe for the
Brilliant.
crew and for the patient.
So they can't just like soar up to the top of Mount Everest for a rescue mission.
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
And then we also can't forget about the airspeed limitations.
So helicopters aren't as fast as jets.
Right.
It takes time to arrive, especially if the scene's far away.
Of course.
So that travel time
Right.
has to be weighed against the severity of the patient's condition
Okay.
and the potential benefits of air transport.
Makes sense.
Right.
And I imagine cabin size is another limitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Helicopters have limited space,
Right.
so they can only transport so many patients, and the patient's size and weight can be a factor too.
Gotcha.
It's all about, maximizing the efficiency of each flight,
Right.
but keeping everybody safe.
Makes sense. You don't want to overload it
Yep.
or compromise safety.
Exactly.
But let's get back to those special considerations.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier, like, what makes landing on uneven terrain so tricky?
Well, imagine trying to land a helicopter
Yeah.
on a hillside or in a mountainous area where there are no flat surfaces.
I can already see the challenges there.
Yeah. So in those cases, extra caution
Okay.
is paramount. So the slope shouldn't exceed 5 to 7 degrees.
Okay.
And the ground crew needs to be super aware
Yeah.
of the main rotor blade
Uh.
because it's going to be closer to the ground on that uphill side.
So approaching from the downhill side
Yes.
is key.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then communication
Right.
between the ground crew and the flight team,
Uh-huh.
even more critical than usual. They
Yeah.
need to coordinate
Yeah.
every movement, make sure that transfer is safe,
Right.
especially with uneven footing and potential obstacles.
Right. What about hazmat incidents? Those sound particularly tricky.
They are.
Yes.
Helicopters generate a lot of wind,
Right.
which can easily spread those materials around.
Right.
So the landing zone has got to be upwind, uphill from the scene.
Okay.
And any patients who are exposed to the hazmat,
Yeah.
they have to be decontaminated before they're loaded onto the aircraft.
It's amazing how many factors go into this.
It is.
It's like a giant life-saving puzzle.
Right. And, medevac flights can be expensive.
Okay.
But the decision to call for one
Mm-hmm.
should always be based on medical necessity, not the cost.
Right. It's about getting that patient the best possible care
Yeah,
as quickly and safely as possible.
right.
And sometimes that means calling in the air cavalry.
Sometimes it does.
But let's bring it back to the ambulance for a second.
Okay.
Talk about some of the legal aspects
Mhm.
of driving an emergency vehicle.
All right.
So we touched on due regard earlier.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what that actually means?
Yeah, so basically it means that Even though EMTs have certain exemptions from traffic laws when they're responding to an emergency,
Right.
they still have a responsibility
Okay.
to operate the ambulance safely,
Yeah.
avoid endangering anyone.
So it's not a free pass to just run
Yeah.
red lights and speed.
No, not at all. Okay.
Yeah.
And if an EMT is involved in a crash
Yeah.
and it's determined they didn't exercise due regard, they could face serious consequences.
Oh, wow.
Lawsuits, fines, even criminal charges.
Whoa, that's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
It must be a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
Then weighing the urgency
Right.
against the need to drive safely.
Absolutely.
And speaking of balancing acts,
Yeah.
let's talk about the use of lights and sirens,
Okay.
because it's not as straightforward as you might think.
It's not.
So you mean there are times when an ambulance might respond to a call
Yeah.
without the lights and sirens?
It happens.
I always just assumed
Yeah.
that was standard procedure.
I know it's a common misconception,
Yeah.
but it's not just about getting there quickly.
Mhm.
It's about making sure the patient gets the best possible care.
Right.
And sometimes using
Yeah.
lights and sirens can actually be detrimental to the patient's well-being.
Really? That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So, like, what kind of situations would that be the case?
So local protocols play a role,
Right.
but the EMT has to consider the patient's condition. So for example, if somebody's having a heart attack
Right.
and they're already really anxious,
Yeah.
that noise and those flashing lights could actually worsen their condition.
Oh.
So it's about recognizing that a
Mhm.
calmer,
Right.
more measured approach can sometimes be more effective,
Yeah.
both medically and psychologically.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
So sometimes less is more.
exactly. And studies have shown
Okay.
that the amount of time saved
Yeah.
by using lights and sirens
Yeah.
is actually pretty minimal, especially in those urban areas.
Really?
Yeah.
I always thought it made a big difference.
I know. It's one of those things
Yeah.
we just assume,
Right.
but don't always have the data to support it.
Right. Right.
And the risks associated with it,
Mm-hmm.
increased chance of an accident, the stress it puts on everybody.
Oh, of course.
Sometimes that outweighs the benefits.
So it sounds like a pretty complex decision
It is.
with a lot of factors to weigh.
Yep.
How do they make that call?
It comes down to training.
Right.
Experience.
Right.
Thorough assessment of the situation. They got to consider the nature of the emergency, the patient's condition,
Mm-hmm.
traffic, even the layout of the roads.
Wow.
And they've got to be prepared for unexpected reactions from other drivers.
Because not everybody
Nope.
reacts calmly
No.
and predictably when they see an ambulance coming.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
Some people panic, some freeze, some make these sudden maneuvers,
Right.
put everybody at risk.
Unpredictable, yeah.
It is.
Right.
So that's why defensive driving is so important.
Yeah.
Anticipating the worst, being prepared to react.
Right. So the textbook talked about maintaining a cushion of safety
Mm-hmm.
around the ambulance. What does that look like in practice?
So it's about keeping a safe distance from other vehicles,
Okay.
being aware of tailgaters,
Mm-hmm.
constantly checking those blind spots.
Which are way bigger, as we said,
Way bigger.
in an ambulance.
Yeah, and then there's that siren syndrome thing we talked about. That adrenaline rush
Yeah.
can cloud your judgment,
Right.
make it hard to judge speed and distance.
So they got to be aware of their own responses to
Yeah.
the siren and fight that urge to,
to speed.
speed up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the safest approach.
Often the slowest approach,
Okay.
especially when you're navigating through traffic, approaching intersections.
Right.
It's about staying calm, staying focused, making smart decisions, even under pressure.
That level of self-awareness
Mm-hmm.
and control
Yeah,
is impressive.
it is.
Yeah. Sounds like EMTs need to be as skilled at managing themselves
Yeah, absolutely.
as they're managing the situation around them.
I like that. That's a great way to put it.
And communication plays a huge part in that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Communication's essential
Yeah.
throughout the entire ambulance call,
Right.
from the initial dispatch
Yeah.
all the way to arrival at the hospital. So it starts with the dispatcher,
Mhm.
gathering that crucial information, relaying that to the EMTs.
Right. And then once the EMTs arrive,
Mm-hmm.
they got to communicate with each other.
With other responders,
Right.
police,
Mhm.
firefighters, the receiving hospital.
It's constant.
It is back and forth.
Yeah.
And any breakdown in
Yeah.
communication can have serious consequences.
I imagine things get even more complicated
Oh,
when
absolutely.
you're dealing with air medical transport.
Yeah. So for starters,
Yeah.
the ground crew needs to provide the flight team
Right.
with accurate information about the patient's condition,
Right.
the landing zone, any potential hazards.
Oh, that.
And they got to do it concisely and quickly.
Right.
Time is of the essence.
Makes sense.
And they might be communicating
Yeah.
on different radio frequencies, which
Yeah.
adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah. It's like a high-stakes game of telephone.
That's a good way to put it.
Everyone has to be on the same page.
Exactly. And let's not forget
Yeah.
about communication with the patient.
Right. That's so important.
It's huge, keeping them informed, reassuring them,
Right.
making them feel as comfortable as possible in a
Yeah.
really stressful situation.
Right. It's treating the patient as a whole person,
It is.
not just a medical case.
Exactly.
Which brings us to
Yeah.
another crucial aspect of ambulance operations,
Mm-hmm.
documentation.
The paperwork.
Right. Those patient care reports
Yes.
that EMTs have to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
I've always wondered what purpose those serve,
Oh, they're so important.
besides just bureaucratic paperwork.
So they provide this record of
Okay.
the patient's condition,
Okay.
the care they received,
Hmm.
any observations, events
Yeah.
that happened during the call.
So they're not just for the hospital's records?
No,
But-
they serve multiple purposes.
Okay.
Legal protection,
Gotcha.
quality assurance,
Okay.
even education and research.
Wow. Okay.
So it's like piecing together this puzzle,
Yeah.
creating a complete picture of the patient's journey from the initial call all the way to the hospital.
That makes a lot of sense. So much happens behind the scenes.
It does
Yeah.
that we never even think about.
Yeah, it's about accountability,
Mm-hmm.
transparency,
Yeah.
and just making sure,
Best possible outcomes.
right, the best possible outcomes for the patient.
Exactly. And speaking of best possible outcomes,
Okay.
let's talk about ongoing training and education for EMTs.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial.
It is, because,
Yeah.
the field of emergency medical services,
Right.
it's constantly evolving.
It is.
New technologies, new treatments, new protocols.
So it's not just about learning the basics in EMT school
Nope.
and then calling it a day.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Ongoing training is absolutely essential for
Yes.
them to maintain their skills,
Yeah.
learn new techniques,
Mhm.
adapt to the changing demands of the job.
I bet those refresher courses, those simulations.
They're intense.
Yeah.
They're intense.
What do they typically cover?
Oh, all kinds of things.
Mhm.
Advanced airway management,
Okay.
trauma care, cardiac life support,
Mm-hmm.
pediatric emergencies.
Wow.
And they also focus on teamwork,
Okay.
communication,
Right.
decision-making under pressure.
It's a constant process,
But as
learning and refining.
It is.
Yeah.
And, that commitment to excellence
Yes.
is really what makes EMTs
Yeah.
such an invaluable part of our healthcare system.
They are.
They're the ones who are there for us
Yeah.
in our most vulnerable moments,
Right.
providing compassionate care
Mm.
and expert medical attention
Yeah.
when we need it the most.
Their dedication's pretty inspiring.
It is.
So as we wrap up this part of the deep dive,
Yeah.
what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with? So, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. The history of ambulance services, the complexities of the operations today. I'm curious
Yeah.
to hear your thoughts
Mhm.
on something that came up earlier.
Okay.
Is rapid response
Yeah.
always the best approach?
That's a good question. It's this fascinating paradox, right?
Yeah, because we tend to associate
Right.
speed with efficiency,
Yeah.
especially in those emergency situations.
Absolutely.
But as we've discussed,
yeah.
sometimes that pedal to the metal mentality
Yeah.
can actually do more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some specific factors
Okay.
then that might lead an EMT to choose a less urgent response,
Okay.
even when every second seems to count?
So, as we talked about before, the patient's condition is a huge one.
Okay.
So if somebody's already super anxious
Right.
or their vital signs are unstable,
Yeah.
the added stress of that lights and sirens response,
Right.
the noise, the lights, the sense of urgency
Yeah.
could actually make their condition worse.
Okay. So it's recognizing
Yeah.
that sometimes a calmer, more measured approach
Yeah.
is more effective,
Sometimes it is.
right? Both medically and psychologically.
Exactly. And then you've also got the logistical factors like
Right.
traffic conditions,
Right.
road closures,
Yeah.
even the time of day.
Right.
All of that can influence the decision.
So if it's rush hour
Right.
and the hospital is only a few blocks away,
Exactly.
a slower, more cautious approach
Yeah.
might actually be faster
Yeah.
than trying to weave through that traffic with the lights and sirens.
Exactly. So it's about thinking ahead,
Right. Strategically.
considering the bigger picture, not just reacting in the moment.
Right. And then the safety aspect.
Huge.
We've talked about that a lot.
We have.
Lights and sirens don't make those other drivers disappear.
No.
In fact, they can sometimes create more hazards.
Yeah.
Drivers react unpredictably.
They do.
Some panic.
Yeah.
Freeze up. Make sudden movements.
Right. And that puts everyone at risk.
Exactly. So it's a good reminder
It is.
that even in an emergency, safety has to be the top priority.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that means choosing a less dramatic approach,
Yeah.
but ultimately a safer one.
A safer one for everyone. And,
Yeah.
we can't forget about the psychological impact on the
Yeah.
EMTs, the patient,
Mm.
that constant urgency, the adrenaline
Yeah.
that can be draining
Yeah.
and can lead to mistakes.
Right.
So a calmer,
Yeah.
more controlled approach can help everybody stay focused,
All right.
make better decisions.
Sounds like being an EMT is as much about managing oneself
Absolutely.
as it is managing the situation
Yeah.
around them.
That's a great way to put it. It's a profession that really demands a lot,
It does. Yeah.
Self-awareness, critical thinking, the ability to adapt.
To those changing circumstances.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's safe to say that we've all gained a deeper understanding.
I think so.
The complexities
yeah.
and nuances of these ambulance operations.
It's been a fascinating dive.
It has been.
I hope our listeners have a better understanding of the challenges and the rewards of this profession.
Yeah, it's been great. For those who want to delve even deeper into this topic,
Absolutely.
be sure to check out the show notes for links to further resources.
There's some great videos
Oh, yeah.
that showcase the skill and precision
Right.
of these air medical teams.
You might even find one of a helicopter landing.
That's always impressive.
It is.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for joining us
Of course.
on this deep dive
It's been fun.
through the world of ambulance operations. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed,
And stay safe.
and stay safe.
Yeah.